Accelerate country progress by scaling up innovation towards drugs, diagnostics, technologies, and vaccination.
Ultimately, we will hold ourselves accountable, for transparency makes all challenges surmountable. We will not surrender, for we have commitments to keep, and many billions to heal.
And
billions to heal.
Before we can sleep.
Bill Gates has written a book called How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. Its main message, according to one uncharitable reviewer, is that we can prevent the next pandemic by doing all the things that did not stop the last pandemic, only more faster and harder. But even Mr. Gates does allow that regardless of how COVID started, even the remote possibility of a lab-related pathogen release should inspire government and scientists to redouble their efforts on lab safety, creating global standards. Over the years, laboratory accidents have resulted in deaths of researchers and others from smallpox, anthrax, SARS and other pathogens. In one case, a global epidemic of flu resulted from a mistake with an experimental vaccine in China in 1977. In recent years, there was a dramatic increase in the number of coronaviruses taken from bat caves into labs for experiments, most of them in a city called Wuhan. Wuhan. Now that's been on the news. I've heard of that. Wuhan Clan. Wuhan, hold on a minute, that's where this pandemic started. Yeah, but that was very definitely in a wet market. The experiments tested how easily the viruses could be induced to infect human cells. Some scientists compared this to searching for a gas leak with a lighted match. You know how we look back at the relatively recent past and find ridicule in like doctors smoking to advertise tobacco? I feel like that this whole Wuhan situation might one day be regarded with similar disdain. If you've got a virus that began in Wuhan and they're doing those kind of experiments there, what would be the reason for avoiding examining that theory? Well, if the pharmaceutical industry is responsible for the outbreak in the first place, how can we entrust the same pharmaceutical industry with the solution? I suppose that's a little binary because the pharmaceutical industry is vast, but actually, when you look at it, there is an incredible problem with monopolisation within the pharmaceutical industry and the agencies that regulate it and figures within the NIH that start to create a sense that these organisations are uncomfortably intertwined and have a lot of shared interests. This pandemic began a long way from where the infected bats live, but very close to the world's leading laboratory for collecting and manipulating SARS-like coronaviruses. That, plus the continuing failure to find an animal infected with the virus in food markets or elsewhere, added to some peculiar features of the virus's genome, has led many to conclude that a proper investigation of the Wuhan Institution of Virology is warranted. What they're doing is still poking around that wet market. Nope, still no bats. We'll get to the bottom of this. Are we going to look at the Wuhan Institute of Virology? No, not quite yet. There's another wet market I'd want to examine before we start looking over there. Why, what are they doing at the moment? They're very busy working on some more bat-like coronaviruses, and luckily, though, the WHO are preparing for the next pandemic. Now, does anyone fancy a spot of lunch? Yes, I think I'll have a little bit of bat soup. But the Institute has refused all requests to open up its 22,000-item database for international inspection, even though doing so could go a long way to reassuring the world. What? You thought there was information that might point to our involvement in the cause of this pandemic? We were organising a surprise birthday party, and that database, that was the guests. Your uncles, your cousins, friends you've not seen for years, and now all my efforts gone to waste. Oh, you're just like your bloody father. So you might think that the World Health Assembly might have put lab safety and transparency of research on the agenda next week at the very least. Yeah, especially if you're trying to look like a plausible, credible organisation. But nowhere are these even mentioned. In February, the WHO held the third COVID-19 Global Research and Innovation Forum. In the titles of the 49 sessions, the word origin did not appear once. Though it set up a committee, the WHO seems to be paying no more than lip service to its own commitments to investigating the possibility of a lab leak. Like some Western scientists, it may be hoping the question of the origin of this dreadful pandemic remains unsolved lest the answer ruffle diplomatic feathers. Here's what a pandemic accord should include. A commitment by all national governments to share the genomic data of all viruses collected in the wild and to share details of all experiments being done on potential pandemic pathogens. Yes, including in biowarfare labs. Something similar happens with nuclear research and with airline accidents, so it can be done. For me, one of the biggest problems we're facing in the world right now is the centralisation of power. Whether it's through financial institutions, corporations, governments, we have less and less ability to regulate and control our lives through democratic means. And for me, the WHO is one of the organisations that most easily represents this problem.